Of all the people you'd expect to make a groundbreaking call on artificial intelligence, the Vatican would probably not be the first choice. And yet, Pope Leo XIV published Magnifica Humanitas, which means Magnificent Humanity, which is an open letter in which we called for a spiritual foundation of what humanity should be in the age of artificial intelligence. But the interesting part is not the statement itself, but it is what it is building toward. Once you look closer at this piece, you realize that this is really a declaration on the politics of this technology, who benefits, who loses. Between the lines, he issues a warning and a criticism that you should know about. And because almost a third of the world's population is at least on paper Christian, his words may carry a resounding influence in the public's view on AI. Now, having grown up myself in a very Catholic Italian household, I found this piece hitting a nerve. Now, I don't kneel in the pews anymore like I did as the good Catholic boy that I wanted to be during childhood, so this video is really not a Bible lecture. But having spent the entirety of my career researching AI, I still believe that this has valuable lessons to understand the future of AI, and not least, ourselves. So what's the story? I read the letter so you don't have to, and in this video I want to untangle it for you. I'll show you how this is really a story about power, about the infrastructure being built, and about the more existential questions that AI has raised. So if this sounds interesting, make sure to subscribe. It may come as a surprise, but the origins of this letter started 135 years ago. And at first, this feels like a detour, but it's actually the foundation of the entire argument. During the Industrial Revolution, the condition of the working class became a subject of intense concern. So writers and thinkers reported on extreme poverty of those working in the factories, operating under hazardous conditions at poverty salaries. Over time, this is what led to the rise of thinkers like Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels, who wrote about the relationship between labor and capital, and ultimately became the breeding ground for communism and socialism. Against this backdrop, so the poverty and misery, in 1891, the Vatican published the so-called Rerum Novarum, which was an open letter in which it addressed the rights of workers for earning a fair wage and even established trade unions. Now, the idea behind this letter was really to establish a fair balance among, on the one hand, these workers in the factories, and on the other hand, the capital owners. So the latter advocated against both extreme socialism, but also against totally unbound capitalism to really secure the dignity and humanity of everyone affected. Now, the first thing that jumps to mind is have a look at the name of the Pope who published that encyclical in 1891, Pope Leo XIII. And that's not by accident. It is said, in fact, that today's Pope Leo XIV took direct inspiration for his name, given the pivotal role that Leo XIII played during the previous Industrial Revolution. So today, really, it seems like we have an AI Pope. No pun intended. Now, the parallels are obvious in today's letter. A lot of the focus, if you look at the headlines, have all focused on the Vatican saying AI is dangerous. But really, there's a lot more to it. If you hold that interpretation too early, you miss the actual structure of the argument. That central argument is that humanity now has a choice between greed on the one hand and purpose on the other, for which it evoked two stories that came up in the Bible. The first one is centered on greed, and for that Pope Leo evokes the construction of the Tower of Babel, which appears in Genesis. Immediately after humanity escaped the great floods on Noah's ship, they settled in a plain in the land of Shinar. And because of fear of destruction and being scattered around the earth, which would have meant certain death, the people decided to build a city with a tower reaching to the top of heavens, which was the Tower of Babel. This tower was meant to guarantee stability, but above all, to make a name for themselves, as the document states. It was, as Pope Leo notes, an impressive feat. A single language, a single technology, a single direction. But he warned that ambition carried a profound danger. Because when a city like Babel is built on pride and the claim to self-sufficiency, languages are confused, people no longer understand each other, and we ultimately sacrifice human dignity for efficiency as we aspire to reach heaven without God's blessing. At this point, the pattern is already fully visible even before it is explained. This is a clear jab to the race-like dynamics of AI development. So unbound construction, infrastructure building like data centers at the expense of water sources and communities who live around it. But that is only the surface level reading. If you think back about that foundational document from 1891, The word efficiency triggers immediate thoughts around AI-related job displacements, especially for the sake of jacking up profitability, particularly in the absence of any meaningful policy that would guarantee retraining or some form of welfare to those affected. So really, Pope Leo is likening the social protections needed in AI to what has occurred during the Industrial Revolution. And the document makes no secret of that, as he urges humanity to avoid what he calls the Babel syndrome. That is essentially idolizing profit while sacrificing the weak and creating a uniformity that neutralizes difference, as he criticized by using AI in warfare or building a future where humans are essentially seen as a means. And he says that this is an ancient, ever-new temptation that today takes on a technical guise. Wow. Now, the second story is a more positive one, which emphasizes community. So after this Babylonian exile, a portion of the people returned to Jerusalem, but since the city was still in ruins, a man named Nehemiah received news of the disastrous state of his ancestral city. So he convened the families of everyone affected, and he assigned each of them a section of the wall to rebuild. He listened to the concerns and coordinated their efforts and addressed any potential opposition. Really, the key message here is that the city is reborn not through the initiative of one man, but really through the responsibility of everyone involved. Bottom up instead of top down. And this is where the contrast really starts to lock into place. By now, you probably realize that these two parables are really a subtle criticism, to put it lightly, towards the way that AI is being developed and pushed by single, very powerful individuals. As Pope Leo writes, we must realistically ask ourselves who holds this power today and how they use it, as it has given those with the knowledge and especially the economic resources to use them and dominate over the whole of humanity and the entire world. It is worth noting that, headlines aside, the technology is seen, in his view, not as something that is inherently negative or positive. But AI, he argues, is fundamentally different from any previous technological revolution in that the usual framing we see everywhere, that we need to reap its benefits while mitigating its risks, which you hear in essentially every policy paper, may be fundamentally insufficient. And that is because of how deeply the technology is intertwined into our own decision-making and the very way that we understand ourselves. And that is probably true. So if you look at the State of AI Companion report, which is linked below, there is evidence in how, when facing a choice in finances, health, or relationships, 1 out of 3 report choosing AI advice over the one from a professional therapist or a doctor or a trusted friend. More evidence has furthermore surfaced how offloading critical thinking to AI can lead to reduced cognitive abilities. This, as Pope Leo argues, complicates the assessment of the potential impact on the technology and its long-term effect that it may have on both the dignity of individuals and the common good. And that matters because in practice, he argues that technology is never neutral because it takes on the characteristics of those who devise, finance, regulate, and use it. You will notice that this document really rehashes some of the old themes around power concentration or around wealth distribution. But even as an AI researcher like myself, there are some questions that this document raises that we sometimes tend to forget with all the excitement around the technology. Where are we going? Toward what goal do we wish to orient ourselves? And what direction should we choose as a people and as a human community? To achieve this, the document lays out recommendations. The first one is that we should be accepting the limits and the weaknesses of humanity without necessarily considering them an error to be corrected. And here really his criticism is that we are on track of developing a technology that is freeing us from all minor inconveniences while at the same time leaving behind entire populations, something that he also calls digital colonialism. Secondly, he says that building a world in which everyone can flourish requires shared responsibility and courage. And really, this is a call for involvement of every stakeholder in societies. So instead of leaving AI-related issues to large companies, researchers, entrepreneurs, workers, educators, legislators, civil society, and even popular movements and faith communities should be involved in this conversation. He provides a quote here, which I think is actually quite interesting. So he says that no one can single-handedly bear the weight of the challenges the world is facing, just as no one is so weak that they cannot play their part, for power is made perfect in weakness. And finally, he says that building for the common good requires an evangelical language. The worldly translation is that we cannot simply condone either naive enthusiasm, think of the AI hype, nor should we also fuel some unfounded fears and the usual fear-mongering around artificial intelligence. Instead, he says that we should establish standards that maintain human dignity, promote digital literacy, and guide research and industry towards justice and peace. If there is one thing that I take away from this document, is that beyond the spiritual grounding of artificial intelligence, beyond whether you're actually a believer or whether you're agnostic or atheist, this does represent the first attempt to really ground the development of artificial intelligence and convene together a large proportion of society across the world, at least the ones who follow Pope Leo, into a common shared of principles around artificial intelligence. Now, whether this is some inspiration that can provide some kind of international consensus, I still doubt that. I think the geopolitical competition is still way too high at the moment to be able to provide some comprehensive principles or a list on how AI should be governed. But if anything is clear, that since about 1/3 of the world's population is Christian, it may have resounding effects well beyond the walls of St. Peter's Cathedral. Thanks for watching. If you found this content interesting, consider subscribing. Let me know in the comment section, do you think that this open letter carries any weight? Do you think there's anything that you find interesting? I'd love to know from you, and I'll see you in the next one.